The book I'm going to be talking about tonight represents a lifetime of work by my late friend, the independent scholar Doug Sims. Doug was born and grew up in Kansas City. He did a tour in Vietnam, which he didn't like to talk about. And after coming back home, he got a BA in Slavic linguistics from the University of Kansas. He moved to New York because he wanted to be around Slavic speakers, and he ended up teaching English to people in Brooklyn, mostly to Russian immigrants. But Doug always loved maps. When he was a kid, he made a wall map of Kansas City. His sister tells me he went around town on his bicycle and sketched out on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. It's not working. No, turn off. I know the feeling. I'm hard of hearing, and I can never hear anything. Sorry. Oh, is that better? Okay. So Doug made a map of Kansas City by bicycle on 8.5 by 11 sheets and pasted them all up on a wall in their home. So he was very into maps. When he got to New York, he started this school, this language school, and he somehow got very interested in the history of cartography. I first met him at international conferences on the history of cartography, which come up every couple of years. And I also spent a couple of days in New York with him. And he became obsessed with Gastaldi. I have to say, he and I bonded over 16th century cartography. It's always been something I loved. And how he quite got this obsession, I don't know, but I think we both agree that he was obsessed, and the fact that he wrote a 900-page book, I guess, says something about that. He had started this book many years ago, and I told him I would be happy to proofread it and help him see it through the press. And then about halfway through that process, he died tragically after a fire in his home. Well, a few weeks after that, I get a letter from his sister in Kansas City. I never knew he had a sister, but he did, and she's wonderful, and she's here. This is Margot Sims. Stand up, Margot. Say hi. And Margot's daughter, Kate, Doug's niece, is also here with her husband. Hello. Anyway, Margot and I worked together on this book, and it finally saw the light of publication last May. And of course, we were delighted. We couldn't, let's see, how do I do this? Where am I supposed to point this? I'm not going to do that. Oh, okay.
They're curly.
Sorry?
We have Moby.
But Spencer needed some financial help, and that came from the Philadelphia and New York dealer Graham Rader. Fellow New Yorkers, Doug and he had become well acquainted, and they shared a fascination with Gastaldi. I had hoped that Graham could be here tonight, but his health makes that impossible. Air travel just doesn't work for him. Make this go away. Anyway, I asked Graham if he would write a few words to introduce you to him, and he did. And what Graham said is, he said, no, it doesn't want to go away.
No, do you want it to go away?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Okay. There.
Okay. Thank you. Graham said, Doug Sims represents one of the best reasons for being a citizen of the United States. This great and enormously rich country nourishes institutions like the Newberry Library, Columbia University, the New York Public Library, and the Library of Congress, where scholars like Doug can do foundational research. My library of 30,000 reference books exists because of people like Doug. This towering masterpiece, he's talking about our book, compilation of Gastaldi's publications, sources, and times is long overdue. Mace, cloves, nutmeg, pepper, and cinnamon are the reasons that Venice was the most important city in the world for 750 years. As the distribution point for the Silk Road, Venice was the most important city in Europe, and Gastaldi's maps detailed its dominance. It has always fascinated me that the Portuguese sea routes are the reasons that Venice's decline as a trading center started in 1499, when Vasco da Gama sailed around Africa on his way to the Spice Islands. This story of loss is best illustrated by studying the maps that Doug has cataloged and illustrated with his perseverance and genius. Doug's book proves to all of us that Gastaldi was the towering cartographer of the Renaissance, creating many more cornerstone template maps than anyone else. His 1548 edition of Ptolemy is the first atlas of America. Did you know that? And the best illustration of the Silk Road routes. For the first time, the importance of this book is detailed by Doug. Thank you, Doug, for giving me so much joy in learning. With great respect, Graham O'Reilly. Well, for such an important cartographer, there's precious little known about Gastaldi's life. He was born, we know, in Villafranca in Piedmont, which is a town about 35 miles southwest of Turin. Here's a Google Earth view of Villafranca, and there's even a street named after him, although it's a very modest street. And I honestly don't know if there's any real connection with the cartographer, but there it is. We know very little about him. We know that he died in Venice in 1566. And this portrait, which might well show someone in his 60s, is the only likeness of Gastaldi known, and Doug goes into some detail about its history. But we really know nothing about the man until he moves to Venice sometime in the 1530s. Here's the famous view of that island city, a woodcut in 6 huge sheets made by Giacomo Barbari in 1500. This is from the Newberry's collection. The first documentary link between Gastaldi and Venice is that in 1539, he took out a privilege to publish a lunario perpetuo, a kind of lunar calendar that was very common at the time. We're not even sure that it was ever published, as no copy has survived. But we do know that early on, he got to know this man. In fact, one of Doug's major themes throughout the book is how indebted Gastaldi's maps are to the work of Giovanni Baptista Ramusio. Ramusio was born in 1485 and died in 1557, so they were either the same in generation, or Gastaldi may have been a few years younger. At any rate, it's an interesting piece of detective work. Doug presents a plausible scenario in which Ramusio might have met the younger Gastaldi in Villafranca. Ramusio was a pivotal figure in Venice. As you can see, he was secretary to the Venetian Senate, secretary to the Council of Ten, which basically ran the city. He had connections with all the important Venetian scholars and diplomats. He was a geographer and linguist. He hired Gastaldi to tutor his son, and he published the first collection of travel narratives. Ramusio's Navigazioni et Viaggi, or Navigation and Voyages, was published in the 1550s. The book's appearance was complicated by a fire in the printing house, which destroyed the second volume and delayed its appearance for several years. Some 40 years later, the first English compilation of travel narratives, Richard Hakluyt's Voyages, was published, followed in the next century by Purchas's Pilgrims, another compilation in English. But as Doug says, with the 5,000 to 6,000 place names in Ramusio's Navigazione, nothing close to that massive information had ever been assembled before. Gastaldi's first map was this one of Spain in 1544. It's a large and impressive copper engraving and was almost certainly engraved by Gastaldi himself. There are actually a number of instances of cartographers in the 16th century who were also engravers, one of the most notable being Gerard Mercator. You'll notice I've designated this as Sims number 1. That's because this book includes the first full cartobibliography of maps by Gastaldi, and this is number 1. The cartobibliography includes full detailed information, all the references you could want, and notes on 136 maps attributed to Gastaldi. Here's a detail of this map of Spain, and you can see that he had a pretty distinctive way of indicating the seas. He also wrote, or should I say engraved, a very fine chancery italic hand, which may well have been based on an italic book, book on italic handwriting that Mercator published just a few years before. But when we look at a print like this, we need to remember that to get this result, everything has to be engraved upside down and backwards on the copper plate. In other words, this would have been the engraver's view. And this is a good place to mention that another of Doug's signal achievements here is to describe in great detail just how complicated the process of engraving a copper plate was, starting with how you get an upside down and backwards image on a plate in the first place. I've actually never read a more thorough account of this process. Just to be clear, here's a diagram showing how copper engraving works. If this is the copper plate, those little V's, those are little lines scratched on the plate with a graver. The plate is then rubbed with ink, forcing the ink into all the lines. Then it has to be completely wiped clean, all the excess ink pulled off, so leaving only the ink in the lines. Then a piece of oops, what did I do? There we go. Then a piece of dampened paper is laid on it, and as it's crushed under a roller, and as you pull the paper up, you pull out little bits of ink on those lines. That's the copper engraving process. No, that's, here's the, sorry. Here's the title cartouche, the dedication and title of the map of Spain, which, like all titles and dedications on Gastaldi's map, Doug fully transcribes in the original language and also in an English translation. This dedication to Diego Hurtado de Mendoza, the Spanish ambassador to Venice, shows that Gastaldi, even in his first map, was well connected to important personages in the city, undoubtedly through his relationship with Ramusio. His second map was of Sicily and also has the same distinctive representation of seas, undoubtedly also engraved by Gastaldi. Doug says of this map, all previous maps of Sicily published are quite simply primitive by comparison. Gastaldi's advance here is altogether startling. And here's a detail showing Mount Etna, one of the most continuously active volcanoes on Earth. Here's the third map Gastaldi produced, a world map from 1546. Notice the similarity of style to the maps of Spain and Sicily, and notice especially the connection of Asia and America. They're completely connected. Here's a pretty recognizable North America, and it just blends over here into China, and over here on the east end of Asia, it's the same. I skipped it. Oh, what am I doing?
You're doing great, Bob.
Of course, no one really knew the exact relationship between Asia and America. What's going on here? No one really knew the exact relationship between Asia and America, and no one would know until 1728, almost 200 years later, when Vitus Bering discovered that strait. But as Doug points out, the cartographer can't just leave a blank. He has to show something. And there was a lot of evidence in terms of humans and animals in the New World that the continents either had to be connected or separated by only a narrow passage. You'll see here some of the places here. This, I was curious to see a place called Tibet, which I think has to be Tibet. Here are the 7 cities of Cibola, the island of Zipanga, Japan. Over here in America, the Gulf of California. Here's Acapulco. Here's Mexico City. What's happening? I seem to have disconnected my... What did I do? Okay, thank you. As Graham mentioned, Gastaldi's edition of Ptolemy is very important. Every 16th century cartographer had to make an edition of Ptolemy's geography, because before Ortelius published his Theatrum Orbis Terrarum in 1570, it was the only world atlas. Of course, Ptolemy lived in the 1st century AD, so his maps were a millennium and a half out of date by this time. The Ptolemaic corpus typically consisted of a world map, 10 maps of Europe, 4 maps of Africa, and 12 maps of Asia. And Gastaldi dutifully includes all these maps, except the world, in Ptolemy's versions. But of course, the 16th century, being in the throes of the great discoveries, knew that Ptolemy's maps were out of date, and most editors added modern maps as supplements. Gastaldi's edition, as it What am I doing wrong? Should I be using this?
No. This is the one. Nope.
Can I back up with this? Oh, you want me to use this? Okay. As Doug says, Gastaldi's edition contains more modern maps, 34, than any previous edition of Ptolemy. And it's the first Ptolemy in which there is systematic coverage of the far continents, with 5 maps for Africa, 5 for America, and 7 for Asia. And it thus evidences Gastaldi's great interest in the cartography of the non-European world. Here's Gastaldi's version of Ptolemy's 4th map of Africa, which you can see is restricted to the northern part of the continent. And it shows the Nile, this actually worked there. It shows the Nile River coming down straight and ending in the mountains of the moon. In this modern map of Africa, Gastaldi is able to give a pretty good representation of the southern half of the continent, thanks to Ramusio's printing of several expedition accounts, including that of Vasco da Gama. As Doug writes, the first Gastaldi map in which he is working almost entirely outside the area of Ptolemy's ancient ecumene. He first enters his element, the non-Ptolemaic world. And here's Gastaldi's map of North America, or rather the southern part of the continent, the only part that was known at all, along with Central America. Carl Wheat, the great bibliographer of Western maps, called it a beautiful and significant little map. And Doug adds that, in fact, it's the first printed map of New Spain. Here's an enlargement of the Gulf of Mexico from the same map. Let's see, here's Florida. Here's the entrance of the Rio de Espiritu Santo, the Mississippi. Here's the island of Cuba. Here's Yucatan, shown as an island, which was very common. Here's Mexico City. Oh, here's even Cozumel. Ramusio's Navigazione, while the only source of so many of Gastaldi's maps, itself only contains 6 maps, but they were all by Gastaldi. Here's his map of Africa in Ramusio, oriented with north at the top, a not terribly uncommon way to view continents in the 16th century, but we can turn it around. Doug says of this map that it is beyond doubt the best representation of Africa to date. It's 1548. And it still shows the Nile ending in the Mountains of the Moon, but at least he got the shape pretty correct. Moving further east, we get a map of South Asia, which you may recognize better here, incomparably ahead of any previous depiction of the area. And further east again, we get Southeast Asia, which is not nearly as good as the first 2 maps, mostly because the principal source for information about this region was still Marco Polo, whose account of his time in the Far East goes back 250 years to the 13th century. But we can still see the Malaysian Peninsula. The Malaysian Peninsula is Taprobana, which is supposed to be Sri Lanka. It's terribly out of place, isn't it? Here's Java Minor, Java Minor, the Celebes. This island here is called, it's called Vendanao, which I think has to be the Philippine island of Mindanao. All quite confused, if not dead wrong, as the Lago de Chiame, which as Doug says, is utterly non-existent. Oops. In his book, Doug sets apart 6 key maps, as he calls them, demonstrating Gastaldi's great advances in non-European mapping. The first of these is what Gastaldi called the first part of Asia, which you can see up close in this photograph right here. These are all taken from the Newberry's collections. This is easily 4 times bigger than the original. And I think if you look at the detail on any of these maps and realize that they're blown up 4 times, you'll think, how did they do that? It's a huge advance over any other map of the area. Doug's second key map is his America, left unfinished at the time of his death, but finally published 30 years later. Versions of these wall maps are very rare. This one is owned by Graham Rader. Then moving slightly south and east, we come to what Gastaldi called the second map of Asia, and that one is, I think that's there. Yeah, we're there. In which he devotes a lot of attention to it's centered actually on the Arabian Peninsula. For many years, people have been repeating the idea that Gastaldi must have used an Arabic source for this geography. And starting with Ortelius in 1570, they've insisted that the Arab cartographer Abulfeda, who lived some 200 years earlier, was Gastaldi's source, especially for places in the Arabian Peninsula. Well, let me just say that in a mere 50 pages, Doug decisively, if not briefly, demolishes this notion. Gastaldi's map of the third part of Asia, it's over there. That's a color, very unusual to see 16th century Italian maps colored, but this one from the Newberry's collection is colored. I think it's probably it is contemporary color, I think, not modern color. This is what Doug considers the 4th key map, and you can get a good close-up view of it over there. The 5th of Doug's key maps is this woodcut world map of 1561. You can see it up close and personal over there. This map has a curious history. Its existence has been known for a long time, since in a booklet by Gastaldi, published in 1561, it contains a brief description of the world, and he refers to a mappamondo, a world map, that he had published and that showed Asia separated from America by a strait named Anian. But although the booklet appeared in several editions in both Latin and Italian and was in print for at least a decade, the map remained unknown. Its existence was made even more certain by an entry in the Venetian archives giving permission to Matteo Pagano, who published the booklet, to publish a, quote, world map in 12 large sheets, unquote. So presumably there were as many editions of the map as of the booklet, but the fact that there was only one surviving copy is just another piece of evidence to show that the fragility and high rate of loss for very large maps. Only in 1932 was a copy discovered in a map collection in Trieste. It had been overlooked for centuries because it was not stuck together, but still in the 10 loose sheets in which it was printed. And I think you can see here, these are, let's see, there's a sheet, another sheet, 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the 2 half sheets were probably printed together on another block. It's not really 12 sheets, it's 10 sheets, but that privilege was undoubtedly referring to this man. Scholars soon figured out that here we had a large world map by Gastaldi and cut in wood by Pagano that shows America separated from Asia. The map, which they described as having recently emerged from oblivion, was offered for sale by Dutch dealers in 1978 for 130,000 Dutch guilders, or about $273,000 at that time. The Newberry was very keen to get this map, and I remember talking with David Woodward about it. But $250,000 $1978 was definitely out of the picture for the Newberry. And the map ended up at the British Library where it lives today. But we did manage to get full-size photostats of all 12 of the sheets. And I was able to lay them out in the reading room, take pictures of them with my little iPhone, and piece them together to make this facsimile, which actually I will at some point donate to the Newberry. And here's the northwest portion of the map. Now, the busyness of the woodcut makes it a little hard to see the outlines, but it's even hard for me to see from here. Yes, there's Florida, Gulf of Mexico. Here's Baja California. And of course, here is the Strait of Anian. In case you're wondering what this would have looked like to the person who cut the wood block, here it is, upside down and backwards. When you look at this, imagine everything in black has to be cut away, leaving only what's in white. Those will be the lines that'll print in black. Here's the thing, besides having to work upside down and backwards, at least a copper engraver could make one stroke, which could be filled with ink and appear on the map. But your woodcutter had to make, here, let's say here's the line he wants to print. He has to cut down on one side, and then make a V to cut that chip out. And then he has to cut down on the other side, and another cut to get that chip out. That's 4 cuts to make one line. Here's the Stretto de Anian with the Gulfo de Anian to the south. No Western person, of course, had ever been there, but Gastaldi reasoned that there had to be a strait. So a very detailed woodcut like this one would appear to have been much more difficult to fabricate than an engraving. So we might well wonder why anyone would have chosen the woodcut technique over copper engraving. Well, the answer was purely a matter of the cost of materials. Wood was common everywhere in Europe and could be planed down to a smooth surface by any woodworker. Copper, on the other hand, had to be mined, smelted, pounded into thin plates, and polished to provide a suitable surface. As David Woodward put it, size for size, woodcuts cost about 1/10 or 1/12 of their copperplate equivalents. 3 years after the Great World Map and about 2 years before his death, Gastaldi made a wall map of Africa, which Doug calls his 6th key map. What I'm showing you here is a copy in the Bibliothèque Nationale, and you'll see that it includes a sheet missing from the Newberry's copy over here. You see, we're missing that southwest sheet. And we worried about that for a long time. In fact, for a long time, we wondered if there was a southwest sheet, or did that perhaps include a title? Well, we finally discovered that no, the southwest sheet is just full of ships and critters. But it's nice to know. Richard Betts, who compiled the most complete bibliography of African maps, says without much dispute, it's the single most important and influential map of Africa of the 16th century. There's clear evidence that Gastaldi was working on a set of wall maps of the 4 continents, Europe, Africa, Asia, and America, although there was little agreement about exactly how many continents there really were, and Doug goes into the various theories at some length. But although he had begun to work on some or all of these, none of them appeared until after Gastaldi's death, having been completed and published by the Venetian publisher Giovanni Francesco Camocchio. Because these continental maps were posthumous, Doug gives them Roman numerals in his cartobibliography. Here is the posthumous wall map of Africa, Roman numeral 2, the wall map of Asia, and here is the earliest known version of the wall map of America, which, because of a complicated series of events, in its earliest impression, ended up missing 3 of its 9 sheets. Doug shows how, in a desperate effort to create a map that might plausibly be offered as showing America, later publishers made some relatively minor changes to the plates, slid the northwest sheet over to there, and to fill in the blank spot, and actually attempted to sell this monstrosity as a map of America. This is known in only one copy in at the James Ford Bell Library in Minnesota. Eventually, though, the missing plates were found, and later publishers, Donato Bertelli and the Scolari family, reissued them well into the 17th century. Graham O'Rader, who owns 2 sets of these continental maps, and this late impression is from one of them. So this has been a quick introduction to Doug's slim volume of 905 pages. Well, it does include a pretty good index. It's available tonight in the bookshop for a mere $40. If you look online, you'll see it listed for $50 plus postage, so consider this a special Map Society discount. And Jennifer Fastwolf, the bookstore manager, assures me that she will take orders. But you should also know that it's available digitally at only $10 from Amazon and Kobo. And frankly, there's a lot to be said for the digital edition, which I'll open in a moment. I guess of the two, I don't know anything about Kobo, but knowing what I do about Amazon, I recommend you go to Kobo first. Anyway, I want to show you, let's see now, how can I do this? How do I do this? Okay, I want to show you what the digital edition looks like. One thing that I'm not good at, oh, that's not on the screen. Here. Hmm.
That look like what it's supposed to look like?
That seems to be, yeah, there's a search in the upper corner. Yeah, thank you. Now, of course, I don't see it here, but okay.
You won't be able to see it.
Oh, we won't be able to see it. Okay. Well, anyway, the thing about the digital edition is you can search, it indexes itself. You can search on any word. So if you type a word in up there, push the arrow, everything will show up. Click on that line and it'll take you to the page. It'll show you the footnotes. Now, one thing about the book is the footnotes are actually at the bottom of the page, which we were very happy with, when we didn't want it any other way. But we renumbered the footnotes with every chapter, because there are over 1,000 footnotes in this book. And we didn't want that big a number in the page. But anyway, those, unfortunately, in the digital, or unfortunately, I don't know, in the digital edition, they are numbered consecutively. But if you click on the footnote number, it takes you right to the footnote, and you click on the footnote there, it takes you back to the text. The other great thing about the digital copy is when he lists reproductions at the end of an entry, if there's a hot link there, you can click on it, bingo, pops right up. The Newberry's copy, I was going to show you the Newberry's copy of the Africa map, the Library of Congress copy, which is just like ours, and the Bibliothèque Nationale copy, which includes a missing sheet. So anyway, there's a lot to be said for the digital edition. Now, I should have included a map of a sunset over Venice, I guess, as my last slide, but I didn't. Anyway, thank you for your attention. You're speechless.
Okay, so this is my first meeting and I'm not a photographer. So people at his time and other map makers, what they use as source material to update the Ptolemy map.
Well, actually, I didn't mention at all the use of portal charts. We know Ramusio had a considerable collection of portal charts. Those are manuscript maps, navigation maps that were made beginning in the 13th century of various parts of the world. Originally mostly the Mediterranean, but there were a lot of portal charts available to Gastaldi in Venice. And those, for the most part, form the outlines of his new maps. As far as the details, the interior details, the rivers, the towns, the mountains, much of that he had to get from the accounts in Ramusio. That's for Gastaldi. I mean, it's probably true for most cartographers. That's how they got their information.
Where were things in terms of surveying capabilities? About the trigonometry that would have been necessary.
Well, where were they in terms of surveying? I mean, they could easily find latitudes with the quadrant instrument that you would sight the sun. That was pretty easy to determine. Longitudes were much trickier. Ptolemy had various ways of finding longitudes. He would have the times of eclipses in one place compared to the time it happened in another place, and you could get an idea of how far apart they were. But basically, it was compass direction and distance. I mean, you know, if you were sailing, it was so many degrees and how long you would sail. That would be how you'd set that point. Over the course of centuries, there's a map of the Mediterranean that can be established by going from port to port and written records, and you can trace it along and you've drawn the map of the Mediterranean. But it was pretty guess by colleague, especially for longitude. But I think Doug, in fact, spent a lot of time working on longitude. And he left the paper somewhere, which you may find someday, that in which he claims to have sort of solved the longitude problem, 16th century maps. I would love to read that. It's in the locker in New York. Any other questions? Yeah.
What does the Newberry have? How did you get all the maps to go in the book? It must have been a nightmare.
Well, actually,
Or permissions.
well, it's interesting about permissions. I almost never ask for permissions. Actually, I didn't mention that. The book does include reproduction, black and white, of all the maps, including that rare one in the British Library. That's the one I did ask for permission. It's a little map. I'll show you what, well, I won't bother, but you can imagine it's this big. And they said, well, okay, if you're only gonna publish it that big, that's fine. But many of the other, almost all the other maps that I reproduced were online and available. I mean, the Newberry has its digital files. They're open for anybody to use. Now, am I wrong about that? I don't know. I don't think I am. Right. Right. And that's true for most other libraries. In fact, many of the maps that I captured for the book came from dealers. Very yeah. Sorry. Yeah, don't about everything. Anyway, it's amazing what's online. It is truly amazing. And some of those things are several of the things I was gonna show you tonight are such that you can blow them up 1,000%. I mean, you get a letter that's this big, that's from a tiny map. So, yeah, that made it a lot easier. Yeah.
Point that makes being a state secret into a much more wider distribution.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, some maps, some world map, the Spanish and Portuguese like to say that the early world maps were closely guarded secret, and there may be the case, but for most part, maps were often made by governments for government purposes, for military purposes or something. So in that sense, they were not public, but there were maps used very publicly for a long time in legal disputes, in various property matters, maps of cities and towns. The whole privacy thing is really mostly relating to maps of the earliest discoveries. Maybe the Portuguese were jealous about letting people know where they had gone, but that's usually not the problem. The maps became quite generally used in the 16th century and earlier. Margaret.
When Doug and I used to communicate by email, I don't know how many times the name Bob Karrow came, Bob Karrow. The admiration was incredible. I now know why. And he just thought the absolute world of him. And literally on his deathbed, I was on the telephone in Kansas City, and the nurse was holding the phone up to Douglas's ear. And I said, Douglas, I am going to find Bob Karrow and we will get your book published. And he did it.
Yeah.
I know. On this is just beyond belief, and I will always be grateful.
Thank you. But there was definitely a mutual admiration society. I wish Doug could have been here tonight to do this. He was a terrific speaker. I mean, you could spend 10 minutes in his presence and think, wow, this guy is amazing. He knows so much, and he would just go on and on and on. So yeah, I'm glad to have done it. Okay, thank you very much.